We are talking about memory today. This is a big one. So, who has experienced some kind of maybe memory challenges, right? You forget stuff, remind yourself over and over again, and then like you just totally space it. Has anybody ever wondered if like there's something wrong? I've had clients who are like, am I getting dementia? So, it's really interesting when you go into memory and what that looks like. Um, we have like there's three main types of memory and that everybody has. So one of them, and this is kind of interesting, is sensory. So we have our kind of in sensory memory, which is like fleeting. It's just in the moment, right? Have you ever had that where you walk in and there's a some kind of like a smell that's like familiar, and it's like, oh, this reminds me of that. So that's kind of fleeting in a sense, like it's something you experience somatically. But the two really main types are short-term and long-term memory, short-term and long-term. So short-term is the one that's going to be most affected by ADHD, and I'll talk to you about that a little bit. And then we have long-term, which is really not as affected by ADHD in a lot of ways. So the short-term memory, or what some people call working memory, what it does, it enables the brain to remember a small amount of information for a short period of time, right? It might just last seconds. So it's what we use to hold information in our head while we are engaging throughout the day. So this could be remembering a person's name, what we walked into a room for, where we left our keys. Have you ever had that where you walk into a room and are like, wait, why did I walk in here for? Like I had something important. I was supposed to remember it, right? So an example of working memory would be, let's say you're going to the store, right? And you have to buy a present for your niece, right? And your partner says, hey, remember, you got to get a present for her niece. She really likes lava lamps. Like, get her a purple lava lamp, right? Remember when you go to the store. So you're like, in your mind, you're like, lava lamp, lava lamp, lava lamp, lava lamp, right? So you get to the store and then you walk in and there's this big display of 4th of July stuff. And you go, oh my gosh, 4th of July, are we going to do fireworks this year? This is going to be so fun. And you look at it all and it looks exciting. And then you go throughout the store and you get the groceries and you're excited about 4th of July and you get in the car and you drive back home. And then your partner says, hey, did you get the gift? And you're like, oh my gosh, I repeated it to myself the whole way on to the store, right? So that is an example of what can be working memory because it's not necessarily long term. Whereas long term memory is going to enable the brain to remember things like important life events, right? Subconscious learned skills, motor skills, key facts. So examples would be how to ride a bike, how to play an instrument, memories of your favorite holiday, traditions like math, 2 plus 2 equals 4. And so with ADHD, our short-term memory, our working memory is impaired, and there's actually a benefit to it. It's actually really interesting, and I'm going to talk about that. So first, I'm going to give more examples of how it can show up with ADHD, and then I'm going to talk to you about a study they did, a couple studies where they've actually tied a weaker working memory to higher intelligence levels. So just FYI, the working memory challenges we might have are actually very different than someone with cognitive decline. So our memory challenges with ADHD are not the same as someone who is getting dementia, who has memory issues, who hit their head, who's they're aging. Those are two very different things, and it shows up differently in the brain. So for our working memory with ADHD, it can show up for us like, again, forgetting why we walked into the room, struggling to follow and remember instructions, right? I forgot about that. Jumping to a new task and not realizing what you were doing before, making simple mistakes. If you've experienced any of these, I'm reading these out. I've done every single one. Misplacing things, struggling with deadlines, missing appointments, trouble remembering special occasions like someone's birthday, even somebody's name, abandoning tasks, forgetting what someone just told you. So if somebody gives you instructions and then you need to repeat it. So those are all examples of how that working memory can come up, and it can cause a lot of shame, right? If you think like, why did I forget that? What's wrong with me? It's due to our alpha waves. So that's part of it, is like it's not brain impairment. That's why it's different. It's our alpha waves. And so those are one of the handful of electrical rhythms that can occur in the human brain. And alpha waves are responsible for filtering out sensory input and blocking out distractions, right? And so children and adults on studies, they showed that with ADHD, we have fewer alpha modulation. So meaning our brain is not as efficient as filtering out certain things. However, at the same time, they've tied it to higher intelligence level based on how our brain prunes. So there's also studies about our brain pruning and what we're actually getting rid of and keeping. So it's a different filtering system. And sometimes we can take in a lot more sensory input and a lot more data, and our brain doesn't prioritize it. So, like if you're, let's say, getting instructions from somebody and you're at a rock concert, right? This would be the analogy. So if you're getting instructions, it's almost like you're at a rock concert with a friend, and um, like you recorded the conversation while you're standing next to the speakers, right? So you're talking to this friend, they're giving you instructions, and you're recording it next to the speakers, and then later you try to play that back to listen to the details of the conversation, but it's really hard because there's a bunch of loud noise everywhere else. So sometimes our recall is actually affected as well because we're taking in so much stimulus. So it's kind of interesting. So what can we do to help this, right? So first thing is we want to acknowledge that like we might have short-term memory challenges instead of just pretending we'll remember and not doing it. So writing it down can be super helpful. Using a calendar. What kind of calendar are you guys using? Using Google Calendar, using a planner? Like, how are you tracking appointments? What are you doing for that? Both? Okay. Yeah. I know J Popson uses both. So one of the things with our short-term memory or our working memory, okay, a lot of people using Google Calendar, is it's really important that we write stuff down. So part of the benefit of like why a label of ADHD, like why do we need that label? And I love this quote. It's like if we didn't have label ADHD, we'd have forgetful, we'd have lazy, didn't care, like unfocused, right? So we have a name for things. And then with that name for things, it's really important to acknowledge where our capacity is on certain things and where the line is, because then we can get tools in place. So if you don't acknowledge, like, oh, I just got to suck it up, right? If you've ever had that, especially older generations, if you don't acknowledge where the weaker parts are and you just expect yourself to have a better memory and you don't write it down, that's not really fair because you're going to come into a lot of situations where you might not remember it, right? So we want to acknowledge it, use a calendar, put any reminder in there. Check that multiple times a day. Have a checklist for things you do often. Write out the steps on a big project or task. Can be really helpful. Visual lists are really helpful. So I see all the calendars. This is great because I know people are looking at this stuff, right? Google and Paper, Apple Calendar. And then Bill's got Google Calendar and Apple, and it feeds into Slack, which your team uses for messages. That's great. What are you using to track like to-do lists, or if you have something you need to remember? What are you guys using for that? I know some people are using Trello, Google Tasks. How do you remember stuff? Paper planner, Kylie said. Ruth says to-do list, definitely paper. Okay, reminders on Apple. Thomas, Apple reminders of Siri. Blitz It or my Remarkable tablet. So Bill Ruffner is definitely a system tech guy. Um, he's in our we have our group coaching, and we've had some good AI talks in there too. Apple Reminder, Google Tasks, yep, alarms. Yeah, so setting alarms can be super helpful as well. So the main thing is we want to give ourselves accommodations instead of beating ourselves up for forgetting stuff. So something that I do personally, my mom does not have ADHD, and so I've taught her, and she's been great. But when she's like, "Hey, can you go get this from the house?" Because she's in a rehab center for her ankle surgery, and I'll say, "Hey," because she'll tell me on the phone, she doesn't understand that I can't just take it in. I'll be like, "Could you text this to me?" Because I'm driving. And so she gets that. She's not going to tell me and I'm going to remember. She's got to text it to me. And then I have a visual, and then I do it as unread or I pin it at the top, and then it doesn't get removed until I do that thing. So then I know to check my text on the top of the hour when I get a break. So I have a system, right? Instead of beating myself up for maybe forgetting something. So there are some things that can kind of make our memory also seem worse that can actually be improved or reversed. So let's say you do have some memory challenges. Here are some things that you could do to make that better. So one, we've talked about this just a little bit before. So allergies or histamine intolerance. So this is really interesting. So like if you're allergic, if you're allergic to cats, dogs, if it's like pollen season, that's actually going to, there's a lot of correlation with ADHD. Not that it causes ADHD, but it turns the volume up. But the body, when there's some kind of, intruder, which is what an allergy is, it produces epinephrine or adrenaline to lower the histamine levels. So that can actually be correlated to focus issues like ADHD or anxiety. The other thing is allergies can be neuroinflammatory. So when there's a little bit of inflammation in the brain, which can also happen when you're sick, what that does, neuroinflammatory, actually affects the way our neurotransmitters are received and produced. And so that can affect our memory as well. That's really interesting. Um, Another one, this common with ADHD, does anybody forget to eat sometimes? When you do that, you're like out showing houses and you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot to have a snack. I forgot to eat. So our blood sugar. So sometimes memory can be improved just by eating regular and having a snack, in which we can be notorious for forgetting. So having something like granola bars or almonds or whatever, an apple, something in your car. So when you're out showing, or if you're in a different industry, whatever industry you're in, and you're really, engaged in what you're doing, so you don't have to go out and get food, you can get a snack if you have low blood sugar. Another thing that can make your memory worse that a lot of people don't realize is if you still have trauma. So, trauma can affect the brain as well. And there's a lot of overlap with ADHD and it can affect the memory centers. And so, doing trauma work can actually improve memory quite a bit. Another one is high stress, anxiety, or depression. So, if you have a lot of stress, you guys know I've talked openly about doing trauma work, but I remember I literally thought I was getting dementia because my memory was getting so bad. And it was during like some really intense trauma therapy where it was just, I was in the thick of it and processing and I really felt like getting dementia or something, but really it was doing trauma work and the brain was just like kind of shutting down to then like work through some of that stuff, or if you have a lot of stress or anxiety. So those can make your memory worse as well. Hormones is huge. So hormones fluctuating, especially if you feel like, especially if you're a woman and you feel like your ADHD is getting worse with age. Remember, ADHD is not progressive. It doesn't get worse. So if you feel like it's all of a sudden getting worse, and for men too, or if you're on hormone therapy or whatever your gender is, like make sure that you know your hormone levels if you're having a lot of memory stuff, because that can really affect it. This is another one that you can do to improve your memory is if you have a vitamin deficiency, so especially B vitamins, and low B12 vitamins have actually been misdiagnosed as dementia. So people have been diagnosed, think about that, like getting diagnosed with dementia or Alzheimer's, and it's really just low vitamin B12 levels. And when you take vitamin B12, all of a sudden, like you don't fit the criteria anymore. So if someone low in vitamin B12 could literally get clinically diagnosed with dementia, think of how that could affect our memory if we're not taking a B12 vitamin or if those are low. Another one is medication side effects that can make memory worse. Lack of movement and exercise. So not just, oh, you should exercise. So movement can actually stimulate the parts of our brain affected by ADHD that tie into memory. So if you get some kind of movement or exercise in the day, it can be it's one of the most effective things you can do besides sleep, medication, those kinds of things. Getting some kind of movement in that can stimulate the prefrontal cortex. Number 9, head injuries can make things worse. I have had some of those, but they're a lot better now, and my memory's gotten better. But if you've had head injuries, alcohol is another one that can make your memory worse. Alcohol and ADHD can really be a not good mix for some people. It can really turn up the volume on traits and make things really, really hard. So if you do drink regularly and you haven't taken a pause to see the difference, it could be that some of your memory stuff is actually coming from alcohol. And that's a significant thing for people. It can change you could be on antidepressants because you drink and you don't even know it's just literally the alcohol because of the way our neurotransmitters are and how sensitive we are to certain substances and how those are regulated. This one, number 11, that can affect your memory, which you can do something about, lack of sleep, or sleep disorders like sleep apnea. So anybody here have sleep issues? It's really common. Trouble getting to sleep, trouble going to sleep, trouble staying asleep, trouble waking up too early. Yeah, okay, great. We've got a CPAP. Yeah. So sleep disorders are really common with ADHD. It's really normal to have that. And they've also shown it's about 75% of us with ADHD may have a delayed circadian rhythm. So you might get tired 2 hours later than someone without ADHD, and you might have harder mornings if you have that. So yeah, we've got comments here. Yep. Insomnia, and has helped some. Okay, so Kim, awesome. She got her CPAP, and that's helped a lot. The vibration plate. Candy, you have night terrors. Those are my best friend growing up had that, and he would, yeah, that was a lot. So, yeah, we can have sleep stuff. That's really normal, and that can affect memory as well. And then if you're like me, and sometimes you might struggle with what's called bedtime procrastination or bedtime revenge procrastination, where you're finished with your day and it's finally quiet and people are asleep and you're like, oh my gosh, like I actually have time to do things I want to do. And so you don't go to sleep because it's the one time that you have to like have fun or watch something and not feel guilty and beat yourself up because it's like late and nobody wants something. So revenge bedtime procrastination is us staying up to actually get time to breathe or get a break from sensory stuff or pursue special interests. But when we do that, then we don't operate as well the next day. And it's this cycle of staying up too late, right, to get our needs met, but then depleting our neurochemicals. So then the next day, we can't get stuff done as fast. So we're not as efficient. So we have to stay at work longer, or we don't get as much done. Therefore, we can't stop sooner, or we can't take breaks. And so we don't get time to refresh. And then, of course, at night, we haven't had time to relax and we're overwhelmed because we're all behind. And then we go through that same cycle again over and over again. So that's that revenge time procrastination that a lot of us can experience. And so we got to stop the cycle and kind of get our serotonin and everything rebalanced, and then we can avoid that. This is an interesting one. Isolation. So isolation can actually affect your memory. I don't know if you've heard that, but they've shown that, and actually being isolated can affect our life expectancy as well. So not being isolated is going to be helpful. And then number 13 is being bored or understimulated. Who's been bored or understimulated before? Right? Oh my gosh. Right? So bored or understimulated, it's like your brain just shuts off. Like has anybody been so bored you fell asleep like in school before? Like you had to stay awake. You almost felt so bored. Yeah, that's so that we can actually be really understimulated, and then that can kind of correlate with that. So next, I'm going to go into just quick. I want to touch on the correlation of ADHD and dementia and Alzheimer's. So what you'll see too is clickbait stuff in your algorithms. If you has anybody seen that where it's like, oh, this new study shows that ADHD is tied to dementia or Alzheimer's, you have a higher risk. Anybody seen that? And then everybody's like commenting and freaking out. That is like one of my biggest pet peeves. So it's not true. This is there's little to no proven connection so far. So that's something to remind yourself. So there was one study that did find a slightly higher risk for just one type of Alzheimer's, but it's not like medically significant enough to mention to patients. And so there's really, and this is Dr. Russell Barkley, who's one of the leading researchers on ADHD, and he's a scientist and he's not funded by anything. So he is the guy, and he says that there's not a medically significant correlation. So if you see that clickbait stuff, and there's so many people freaking out in the comments, it just like makes me so sad. Know that there might have been one study that said that, but there's 35 other really credible studies that say that's not true. So when we're looking at it, even if you find one study, that's why it's so important not to go off one article, because there could be another factor in there. We don't know. We don't know the baseline. We don't know how many participants were in it. It could have been 35 people, so the data is skewed, right? It could have been that these people were taken from a certain part of town or a certain area, a certain age. So that's why we look collectively at multiple studies. So just if you ever get worried about that, don't. There's not a big correlation. Then I want to say the benefits. So what are the benefits? Because you're probably not walking around like, I'm so glad I have a weaker working memory, right? Like you're probably not going to say that. So the benefits. So the like according to Scientific Journal, Neuron, this is a highly regarded in the neuroscience field, the scientific journal, that forgetting things is not normal. It actually can make us smarter. So the goal of memory is not to transmit the most accurate information over time. That's not necessarily the goal. It's to optimize intelligent decision making by holding on to what's important and letting go of what's not. So the goal of memory is not to just have the most accurate thing or the most accurate recall. It's actually biologically for us to optimize intelligent decision making by holding on to what's important and letting go of what's not. So they did this by looking at years of data on memory and memory loss and brain activity in humans and animals. And they did a study on mice, and that as new brain cells are formed in the hippocampus, like the region of the brain associated with learning new things, new connections overwrite old memories and make them harder to access. So new brain cells are formed. It's going to make older things harder to access. So we're replacing old with new connections in our brain, and we're actually adapting, right? So if we take on that new thing with, oh, that's true. Oh, we're actually replacing the old connection. So when you have ADHD and you're going to do that faster, your pruning is going to do that faster than someone without. Which is why we can be really adaptable, which is why if you look up the prevalence of neurodivergence in our inventors and scientists and leaders and entrepreneurs, you're going to find a much higher prevalence of ADHD because our brain is pruning in a different way. So what they found in those studies is that replacing those old connections with new connections is also going to help us see the big picture more clearly. So if you have a big vision, which I know a lot of you do on here, and I do as well, that's part of it. It allows creativity. It clears our mind so we can replace stuff, so we can act more quickly. We can adapt to new situations. We can be more resilient. We might forget difficult memories. We might replace those difficult things or painful things more quickly. Forgetting certain details can help us see similarities between past events and appreciate the interconnection. So pattern recognition can actually be different recall. And we might forget specific details, but remember the big picture. So we can help generalize past experiences and apply them to current situations versus like getting lost in tons and tons of details that don't really matter. So again, that ties to pattern recognition. So if you forget something, give yourself grace and compassion, right? And remind yourself that it's just a different pruning system. Your brain has a different way of pruning and a different way of operating that's going to optimize intelligence and pattern recognition and big picture thinking, but you might forget the gift for your niece, the lava lamp that I talked about in the beginning of the call, right? You might forget and you might have to drive back and go get it. Or you might buy groceries. This is one. Anybody buy groceries and produce and you put it in those drawers under the fridge and you forget it exists? Anybody done that? See smiles. Yeah. It's like, oh, I got kale or I got this organic produce. And it's like, dang it, like the spinach has gone bad. Okay. So it's like you can buy new spinach or you can buy new kale, but you can't get a smarter brain, and you have that smarter brain because your pruning system. Like that's pretty cool, right? Um, and so I know some people do a mantra like when you forget something like I'm good at other things. I'm really good at other things, or I have a different pruning system. The other thing is I play the oops game. So if I miss something, I forget something, I go, oops, oops. It's okay. I'm not a brain surgeon that forgot to put the brain back in. Like it's usually all solvable. So oh my gosh. Annette said, my CRISPR is a vegetable hospice. That's hilarious. That is so funny. Ruth says half of it is always spoiled beyond recognition. That's so funny. So I've actually a lot of times take the CRISPR out so I can visually see everything. And I might, and this is just other people have done this too. Like I might go grocery shopping twice a week and everything is like where I can see it visually. That's what some people do as well. So that's so funny. Okay. So that's what I have for working memory and forgetfulness. So you're not getting dementia. You actually have a really cool brain with a great pruning system. Get accommodations in place, give yourself grace, and then go sell some houses or build your business, whatever that is. So for anyone that's on for the first time, if you want to join in our group program, our group monthly membership, we've got a 7-day trial. There's the link right there if you want to check that out. And this month we are talking about Becoming More. Diana Costa, if you have not heard of her. So Becoming More, we're doing book summaries and then discussions. It won an award for the top neurodivergent friendly award. So we're gonna be looking at this book. It's really cool. And then she's actually coming on. We're gonna have a private call with her. I think it's the third week of this month on our monthly membership. So check that out if you want to. And that's the link. Thank you for being here, and we'll catch you next Tuesday. Or if you're in our group, we'll see you this Thursday. So have a wonderful day, everybody, and thanks for being on.